Hello everybody, welcome back to Hidden Harvest with Liz. My name is Liz and today we're going to be talking about preparing your garden beds. If I can get my hands in the right area for this camera. Like I said, I do apologize. I am waiting on my other tripod to come in. This one's just being wonky. What I wanted to talk to you guys about was prepping your beds for the new garden season. I know everybody's chomping at the bit, waiting to get those plants in the ground, but right now is the best time to go ahead and get those beds prepared. And right here behind me is one of the beds that I have just recently prepared. As you can see, I have smoothed everything out. I've gotten everything mixed up, and this bed is ready to go. I have actually already been working on this project. I have got that bed prepped, that bed prepped, that bed prepped, those two beds back there prepped, and all of those are ready for plants to go in ground as soon as temperatures tell me it's okay. So you might be asking yourself, what do I have to do specifically in order to get a bed ready to be planted into? That all depends on where you are in your gardening journey and whether or not this is a brand new planting space. Obviously, you're going to have to worry about the weeding and the tilling and the however it is you plan on actually prepping your space. Right now, I have got a weed in this bed. Sorry. I have got several beds that I set up last year, and I have been working the soil. All of these beds that you see behind me are brand new as of last year. Hang on, we've got a car coming. These beds are brand new as of last year. I put all of these beds in. Now, there is some potting soil / gardening soil that has been added to these beds, but mostly this is my native Georgia Ray clay that has been put into the beds. And as such, because the whole point in growing in raised beds, aside from easier weeding, which is like one of the main reasons I wanted raised beds, one of the other reasons is because you can actually create the best type of growing condition for whatever it is you're trying to grow. In these beds, it would be awesome if I could just put some really great soil in here with high nutrition is what I actually meant. It's nitrogen and nutrition together. Nutrition. Yes, it would be awesome if I could have just started that way, but that is very expensive. You would not believe, unless you have recently put together a garden bed or a raised bed, you would not believe how expensive it is to fill a bed with dirt. And I say dirt loosely because that's like mulch, garden soil, raised bed soil, whatever you want to call it. Any of those, in order to fill one of these beds, it is very expensive. So whenever I went to start these beds, I do have videos actually showing some of the process, not a huge amount of the process, because this happened so late in the season that I kind of barreled through it rather than record a whole lot of it. Between last year's garden in the fall and this year's garden, I went through each one of the beds and tried to aerate the soil, and I found out that I had large pockets of basically the hardest clay that's in the ground. It was in my beds, so I had to go through, crunch up all of the soil back mushy again, and then I took my wood chips and mixed them into the soil and then planted into them again. I know that affected my plants a little bit. Whenever you put wood chips into your bed, it will eat up some of the nitrogen, but I wasn't worried about the nitrogen. I wasn't actually worried about the plants I was giving to my chickens anyway. We ate very little from the garden. Specifically, I grew inside the beds to make sure that the beds were continuing to be active. And I was pleased to say, whenever I started doing this particular run through, I went through it and broke up the beds again, just to be sure that my method last year worked properly, and it did. There was not a single bed, aside from one, that had like chunky clay in it. The two beds that are up front and the one that's way in the back, I haven't broken those up again because those were planted into in the fall, so those are going to have to wait until I get those guys out, probably at the end of May, and check those. But so far it has worked. So I just took our Georgia Ray clay, I added in some soil that I found from the store, and I've used several different types of soil. I've used Vigo, I've used brown cow, I've used a lot of different stuff, whatever was cheap on hand that I could just mix in with the soil. It's not that the soil doesn't have nutrients, it's just that it's so dense it has a hard time growing anything, so that was my goal. And then I took my wood chips, which they were aged wood chips. I can actually show you some of the wood chips now. They're aged, and underneath that there's actually like little bits of it that have actually broken down really well in each one of the beds. Then I mixed that into my beds to break it up even more. Now, that's just over the process of basically 2 growing seasons. So whether or not you're having to go through this process. It depends on whether or not, what kind of soil you're starting with. I was starting with basically Georgia red clay. You might be starting with loamy soil or anything else like that. So let's move on to what you might have to do in order to prep a bed for just one garden season. First off, you're going to have to make sure your soil is aerated. It does not have to be tilled. That's kind of a last-ditch effort for soil that is truly compacted. There's a huge fad going on, the no-till method that is going on, and they advocate for not tilling soil because it breaks up things. But there is definitely soil that is so compacted life cannot really truly live inside of it unless it's broken up first. So you break up the soil, you add in things that are basically like disruptors to them clinging back together. Wood chips, broken down leaves, soil out of bags. I mean, any number of things that you can think of, even if it's like sticks and things like that that you have to put in there just to break it up. Understand, if you're using these methods, you're probably going to have the first year not do so great because it is going to eat up the nitrogen, but it will make it better the next year. And the reason I say that is last year's garden did not do so great. I got a lot of stuff, a lot of surprises and all kinds of things, but I expected the beds to not do as well because clay soil, having to put things in there that need to be broken down and things like that. But this year the soil is better. So depending on how far along your particular bed is, depends on how much you're going to have to do to your particular bed. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comment section. Either I or somebody else can answer your questions. I also have a Discord. In my Discord, there is a gardening section because not only do I do gardening, I'm also a gamer, which is an odd combo, but hear me out. I play survival games and I do a whole lot of gardening in those games too. So they do tie in together. But the Discord is actually for my gardening content and for my gaming channel, but there's a lot of people in there that do both. We have a whole lot of folks that, oddly enough, the hobbies cross over, I guess. So if you have any questions about ways to amend a soil, and by amend I don't mean like adding fertilizer, that comes different, that's a different thing. What I mean is like how to prep a type of soil to make it a better growing medium is what I mean. Now, after you've turned it into a better growing medium as best you can for that particular year, obviously first year garden, it's going to be hard going, but do what you can for that year with the understanding that's what you're doing for that year. The next year you might want to add a little bit more soil, you might want to add a little bit more depending on how your soil reacted to it. Say it's still compacted and you needed to add some more. I would definitely not say adding minerals or anything, and do not, if you have clay sand, add soil to it. There are some places on the internet that are telling you to add sand to clay soil to make it better, and it's like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. It'll turn it into concrete in here. Don't do that. Add in some sort of a natural mulch of some sort and mix it up in there with the understanding it is going to tie up nitrogen, but it's going to loosen your soil for you. If you have like a sandy soil, even doing the same thing to that one, adding some sort of mulch, some sort of compost, some sort of organic matter into the soil will help it. If you have loamy soil, you're pretty much set if you have loamy soil, so you really don't have to worry about any of these. The next step after having aerated and amended the soil for texture, I guess you could say, then you're actually going to have to amend the soil for nutrition, and that there's a couple of different methods you could go with on that one. Some people go the truly native method and say, I'm just going to add compost to it and that's it. There's also I'm going to push my bed as hard as I can to get everything that I can out of it, and they use synthetic fertilizers. That's entirely up to you as well. One of the better ways to handle it, though, is to use an organic fertilizer, preferably a pelleted type, because that breaks down. But the fertilizer that is organic feeds the soil and feeds the microbiome of that soil, not just feeding the plants. And that would be the method that I would recommend on all of your beds. Each one of the beds that I have done, I have put basically 2 cups of soil per bed on each side and mixed it into the top 2 inches of it. I did go through and aerate my soil like I said before, and I mixed from probably 4 inches under the soil all the way up to the top, And then I only mix the amendments, which is the actual fertilizer, into the top 2 inches of the soil, because that's where it's going to be the most available for the plants whenever I put the plants in. Now, that's not going to stop me whenever I put the plants in from putting fertilizer into the individual holes. I will still do that. The next thing I would do is, if you've got a little bit of time, for us, we've already passed our last frost date, but there's usually one more frost, and we're going to get pretty cold tonight, and there's one more time this weekend. It's going to get decently chilly, so I've got a little bit of time, and that bed over there is a culprit. But we've had rain, and if you have rain pack down your soil after you did all of that work, it's going to be a problem. So definitely cover the bed if you're not going to be able to plant into it. Either use a tarp, use cardboard, use something to lay over the top of the bed to keep that soft soil soft until you're ready to use it. The bed that I did over there that I showed, the top part of it, I did it and I was exhausted, and I went inside and fell asleep on the couch, and the next day it poured down raining, and that soil's probably gonna have to be turned again, which sucks, but sometimes it happens. But I would recommend putting down something to just protect the soil until it's time to plant in, and then obviously pick that up, plant straight into it, and that will also help hold the moisture into the soil. Now, after you start planting your plants in there, remember to do your watering and your mulching around your plants. Just put some straw or some wood chips, whatever your personal preference on mulch is, around your plants, and that will protect all the work you did for your soil. But I will show more about that whenever we finally do actually plant into this garden, which should just be a couple of weeks from now, hopefully. Everybody cross your fingers. I know I'm not the only one who's waiting anxiously for the ability to plant out. I have got plants that are in dire need of planting out as it is. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this episode. I will see you guys in the next one. Hopefully next time I can actually, as I prep the beds for my onions to go in and my garlic, which is where you guys are sitting, and where my other onion bed is, whenever I go to prep those beds for a new planting, I will actually be able to show you guys the process. Sadly, I was not able to show the process. This is just something I did. At the time when I did these, I just ran outside and quickly did as many beds as I possibly could. My camera wasn't charged whenever I was working on these, so I do apologize for not bringing you along for that particular step, but I hope this helps out a little bit. I do have some videos where I was turning beds and working on beds, so I would definitely check out this video or that video YouTube is recommending for you, and I will see you guys in the next one. You have a wonderful day off night, and you stay shiny. Bye!